Pamela Palmater, Ryerson Chair in Indigenous Governance, and in Ottawa, we have Tim Powers. He is the Vice Chairman of Summa Strategies. Thank you very much both for joining us.
Thanks,
Is
Sarah.
the federal government doing enough to tackle this issue? That was at the core of this emergency meeting. Pamela, let's start with you.
Well, I think they are working on it. They're having emergency meetings. I think they should clearly be having more. I think they should also be including First Nation governments in this, keeping in mind it impacts First Nations lands and resources and various jurisdictions. However, we also have to keep this in perspective. It's being portrayed as a crisis, an influx, and the numbers have actually showed that over the long haul, the number of asylum seekers have actually decreased, and that's similar statistics around the world. So what's the real crisis that we should be looking at? And from my perspective, the real crisis is the issue around the safe third country. The crisis has been created by the U.S., not even because they've had a massive influx, but because of how they've treated the people on the ground, created a human rights crisis, and that creates a human rights crisis for Canada, and that's something that deserves emergency attention.
Tim, what do you think about the federal government response?
Well, I think, Sarah, there's another element to this, too. Pam's absolutely right. This all started when President Trump got elected, and he made a very regressive statement, in my view, that he was going to change the qualifications for people getting into the United States. A number of people would now be excluded who were previously included. You'll remember, the viewers will remember, just moments after that directive was made by the president, our own prime minister tweeted, and it was something to the effect, Canada would be an open and welcome place. That got a number of Canadian policymakers a little anxious as to what did the Prime Minister actually mean? How was Canada going to receive asylum seekers and others who were coming here? So the Conservatives are trying to link back to this because there is some bureaucratic concern about all of this. The new element to the criticism or the challenge to whether the Liberals are managing this properly or not is coming from the City of Toronto, the Government of Ontario, who are housing many of the people who have come to Canada who can't afford to pay the bills, and it's about them also trying to get more money out of the federal government to make sure that they can pay their bills and they are not forced to download or remove services from some of their own constituents.
Pamela talked about the third safe country. I want to just pick up on that because that was obviously discussed. We heard Jenny Kwan in the earlier clip there talking about it, saying that the U.S. is not a third safe country. So the NDP wants the policy to be scrapped, insisting the U.S. can't be considered safe. But Conservative MP Michelle Rempel, she also talked about this. We have a clip to play you if we can cue that up, because she feels very differently. She feels that, well, here, we'll let her say it. I think we had that clip.
The government has said that they think that the Safe Third Country Agreement is still valid. However, by failing to close that loophole and some of the language that we've heard out of the Immigration Minister in the last few weeks, I think that they've actually now made a policy decision that this situation is normal. They are trying to normalize it.
So from the sounds of that, she's basically saying that the Liberal government, I don't know if has scrapped is the right word, but they're at least ignoring the third safe country agreement and allowing refugees to come from the U.S. into Canada, where they're supposed to seek asylum in the U.S. if that's where they arrive first. Do you agree with Rempel that that's what's happening, Pam?
Well, I mean...
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Pam.
I was just going to say, it's really hard to say. I mean, there's a lot of political rhetoric around this, but you would have to actually have the current statistics on the files. I mean, there's always a certain amount of discretion built into the legislation, the regulations, and the policy, and the people who are actually doing the interviews and the processing, keeping in mind that asylum seeking isn't just some people who are crossing the border in hopes of getting citizenship. These are, crisis situations. People's lives are often in danger. It can impact whole families, which is why we're even having this conversation around the safe third-party agreement and whether the U.S. is in fact a safe country to bring a family across if you're seeking asylum in these kinds of emergency situations. So, I mean, before I made any judgments around whether or not they have effectively abandoned that policy anyway, you'd really have to see the current statistics.
Well, and part of the politics
Tim, your thoughts?
here,
yeah.
Sorry, Sarah. I was going to say part of the politics here, too, is, again, another vulnerability that the Conservatives are trying to get at with the Liberals is around the issue of safety and security and integrity of agreements. One of the things where the Prime Minister has always had some trouble from a polling perspective are on safety and security issues. So the Conservatives are asking these questions, trying to go at that point. The Liberals are trying to counter offer and say, look, we're doing the best we can in these circumstances. We're open, we're welcoming. You guys are intolerant. So that's the political debate that's playing out here. Again, I don't want to have a panel where we always agree, but I agree with with Pam. We need to see some of the details here as to whether the agreement has actually been abandoned or not abandoned. But this isn't a losing point for Michelle Rempel with Conservative supporters.
One question I've had about this issue as it's been playing out over the past few months is the Canadian approach to accepting refugees. And let me play devil's advocate here because, of course, as you say, we have a panel that agrees here. But is the Canadian approach maybe naive? We tend to look at other countries that are turning away refugees, and I'm thinking of Italy, for instance, boatloads of people arriving in need of asylum and in a dangerous situation and being turned away. And much of the world, including Canada, is critical of that for obvious reasons. But at the same time, we're not really in that position. We don't see the same numbers of people coming. Partly because of geography, so we're not having to deal with that influx and the expense that comes with it. So are we in a privileged position to be able to look at other countries and feel this way about their approach? Pamela?
Well, I mean, you have to look at the issue in a really holistic way. I mean, of course, you know, Canada or any country has to look at security issues. They have to look at the economic issues, but you also have to look at the human rights issues. And I think Canada, in comparison to some other countries, has been particularly stronger on the human rights dimension and, you know, making sure that especially asylum seekers whose lives are in danger, where families and children and women their lives are in danger and in immediate need, that's something that we put on a very high priority, that we look at the humanity of the whole issue. You know, that being said, I think it's really important for Canada to really step back and take a look at the whole package. You know, you've got, you know, a refugee program, a resettled refugee program. You have basic citizenship and immigration and, you know, asylum seekers. And I think it's important that all the governments get around the table, you know, federal, provincial, and First Nation governments, and talk about all of the implications and what we could do. Perhaps it's a scenario where all parties will say, you know what, maybe there's more we can do on the international stage. But right now, you know, it's being portrayed as an international crisis, but overall the numbers are not what they're being portrayed. And certainly in Canada, the numbers have actually been decreasing. Right. So I think we have to look at it more of a international human rights, where we're going to go in that direction versus, you know, any kind of alleged crisis here in Canada.
Tim, what do you think about that word, the use of, as Pamela is saying, the use of the word crisis, especially when we consider what is happening in other countries and the kind of numbers that they're actually seeing? Is crisis a fair word to use in terms of what Canada is facing?
I don't think we're facing a crisis. So we've got our first point of disagreement, and our second point of disagreement. Yes, Sarah, Canadians are naive. Maybe our security forces aren't. I don't think they are, but I think the public debate thrives on a bit of naivety and a bit of a sense that Canadians, we take pride in being generous and we take pride in being welcoming, and we sometimes maybe feel we should overlook certain elements. Again, I don't know if our security forces do that or not, but you saw that debate creep into this discussion coming out of the immigration ministers meeting in Winnipeg this week. You had the spectacle of the federal immigration minister, according to the Ontario minister, suggesting, well, you heard the tape, suggesting she was un-Canadian because she was looking at it in a different way. I don't know if she was taking an approach that reflected a more stern security perspective, but I think she was raising the issue of who would pay for all of this. So what happens when somebody who's opposed to the Liberals do that is they try and invoke this argument, well, we need to be open, we need to be responsive, you shouldn't question all of this. And I think that leads us back to the naivety point, where sometimes we don't ask the tough things we should ask because we're potentially afraid of offending somebody.
Okay, I want to bring the viewers in here because we've got a number of questions that are starting to pile up here. One from a user by the name of CanMan1000 on YouTube asking a question that we've heard before. This is a familiar one. Why are we bringing these people into Canada when we need to care for our own homeless and Native Canadians? Pamela, I'll start with you on that one.
Well, of course, Canada, I mean, without a doubt, has fallen down completely on taking care of First Nations who literally live in fourth world conditions. And that's something that Canada should be doing regardless of issues around immigration. That goes without saying. And the same with the fact that there's increasing poverty amongst Canadian children. There's increasing homelessness. It's getting harder and harder for people to be able to just to live, you know, to buy housing. And so by all means, federal and provincial governments are on the hook, treaty-wise, Aboriginal rights-wise, land-wise, to address all of these things. At the same time, this isn't about Canada bringing in a whole bunch of people and creating a crisis. This is about relatively small numbers of asylum seekers, often whose lives are in danger, who are coming here saying, you know, the only way to protect our lives is to find asylum in another country. And I think that it's incumbent on Canada to look at this in that kind of human rights context.
Tim, I want to put that in, but I want to add to it from another viewer, Fat Luong, who is writing, he's sort of adding to that first question, asking whether it's possible to have refugees pay for some of their lodging, some of the expenses that they would incur when they arrive. And I think Pamela kind of helped cover why that might not be possible for somebody who is a refugee to financially contribute to staying in Canada. Why is the messaging, though, why is it the messaging of why it's important to have to welcome asylum seekers and those who are refugees into the country? It's difficult to translate to some people who are watching it happen as they see increasing numbers.
Yeah, because the first element of most stories is what's it going to cost, and that's a lot about what we've talked about here tonight. The other element, though, too, I hate to say it, but we are all a nation of immigrants, and we all did come from somewhere before. We have declining birth rates in this country. So to answer your question, Sarah, after people come and they claim economic injustice, or they claim they're economic refugees, and they spend some time, one hopes, and that's the intent when people come to Canada, that they become productive members of the workforce. They get jobs, they contribute to communities, and they become even more passionate than some Canadians who've been here longer, ensuring that the right economic conditions exist for them to survive and thrive. So we tend to be a little myopic. There's lots of benefits in this country for immigration.
Thanks, guys, for that conversation. Thanks to the viewers, though, as well, for weighing in. It was a good talk and some important questions there. Pamela Palmater, Ryerson Chair of Indigenous Governance, Tim Powers, Vice Chairman of Sumas Strategies. Always a pleasure to have you guys on.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.